Okay, so we're live on YouTube now, and Roger and Adrian and Alva are here with us to address some of the questions that have been coming in during that broadcast, and in fact may still come through as we're talking here. And I'll start with one, which is quite interesting actually, from Pete McDermott, and he wants this addressed to all three of you. So let's start with that. First of all, thank you all three for your time and generosity in sharing your work on processes. He says, visionary can imply a singular, unique way of thinking or working, yet you all collaborate with other artists. In what way does collaboration with our others support, challenge, or transform the vision you're pursuing in your art? I suppose in some ways, Roger, the composer is often thought of as up in the attic in the garret by him or herself. Whereas you very much have a collaboration, and Alwyn Fuere has been a particular collaborator of yours.
I do spend a lot of time in the attic on my own still, and I love it. But I also equally love collaborating. And I suppose, yes, it was initially through Alwyn that I began collaborating. I saw people doing it, working in theatre. You see it in action, and you see. I wanted to place my music in different environments, different live environments in theatre and in concerts. Even if I'm working with singers or instrumentalists, it's the same, or with a writer, or indeed with Trish as a filmmaker. You see the music placed in other environments, and you see somehow how they bring the beauty they bring to it, and you see this coalescence of the two things come together. It's a beautiful thing. I've always been. I find that the music is terribly enriched by collaborations.
For you, Alva, I think again, I'm leaving Adrian purposely to the end here because the collaboration is kind of inherent in a theatre piece in some ways. But for you, Alva, you spoke to me a little bit about how while you're collaborating, you're still the captain of the ship, if you like, and that has two sides to it. You can make the decision to turn to starboard or to turn to whatever direction you want, but you also are the only one with the responsibility. So if you don't drive the ship, it don't go nowhere.
Yeah, and yet I do feel completely dependent on the team that I've kind of gathered around me to work with. And I work with a cinematographer, and it's been the same person for the last couple of years. Fergal Ward, who's an amazing filmmaker, an artist himself. And that feels really key now to making my work. I can't really imagine working without him. And similarly, I work with the post-production house based in Belfast, Enter Yes, and what they bring is just incredible. I mean, I am deeply grateful and reliant on the people that I work with to make it happen. So that does feel really key.
Yeah, picking up on some of the specific words though that Peter had in his question there about support, challenge. How does it support, challenge, or transform the vision that you're pursuing in your art? That type of collaboration.
I mean, on a technical front, it just completely enables it, and so that's pretty transformative because you're operating outside your own limitations. And I do think I teach in an art school, and I do really question the model that's still very much in place there, which is based around that idea of I find the word even visionary really problematic in terms of its associations, and that idea of the solo genius. I think to break that apart is really helpful because you think differently with other people, or you're not stuck within your own limited technical skills or capacities, or that conversation is just so important.
Adrian, it is totally, without collaboration, you have no work.
Absolutely, there's nothing there, I mean, I'm old enough to remember making theatre at a time when actors were more regarded as sort of puppets that you moved around, and the idea of, I grew up with the idea of the sort of all-powerful director, but thank God those days are long gone. You're working with people from the word go. You have no choice but to listen and be inspired by and have ideas. So yeah, it's my meat and drink is collaboration. Really, I can't imagine a world without it.
Yeah, and I guess that is the transformation. It's the input from all of the collaborators. Is there a sense of, sometimes a decision made by committee can be hugely problematic, but is there a sense of equal rights when it comes to the choosing of what stays, what goes, what's performed, what's not performed?
Now, I'm not a believer in art made by committees at all. No. I think if this word vision has any value at all in the context of this debate, it's about achieving some kind of clarity at a certain point, and the buck stops. And you need somebody who stands outside things. That's the director is the first audience member, and that's so. No. To be clear, I'm probably as controlling an artist as most artists are, okay.
And I guess that is, the composer has that for you, Roger. Ultimately, the end decision is yours in these processes.
Yeah, I was going to say there, not always, mostly, but not always. If you're working in a collaborative environment in experimental theatre, which is what I've done for many, many years, sometimes what you want musically can be overruled. And I don't mean that it's by committee, but it's the greater good of the show, and that's another thing a collaborator, at least for me anyway, has to learn every now and then not to get your way, to see it in the bigger picture. So
you're kind of agreeing, Adrian.
No, absolutely. That's the real thing. I love those collaborators who say, I should have less in this bit. This bit should be, I've made too much music. It's too messy or whatever. So I'm glad to hear that, Roger. There may be a future for us yet.
How often, Roger, have you said, oh, I've made too much music, let me cut it immediately?
Never.
I thought as much.
It's not so much the amount of music, it's how much else is going on at the same time as the music. Sometimes I have to allow other noises, other bangs and crashes, other bits of text, air conditioning systems, who knows. You gotta let it happen.
Yeah, it kind of picks up on in some ways, that there are lots of things going on. A question that came in for you specifically, Alva, I have to put on my glasses to read off the screen. Your own work, Alva, how much of the imagery, music, video overlap? And this is all about how you meld those different art forms, which is what both Roger and Adrian have been speaking about there in that collaborative field, if you like. How much of that overlap is a happy accident?
Yeah, I guess I talked about happy accidents. I suppose, you work unbelievably hard to find the happy accidents. I suppose it's worth putting that up front. So you slog endlessly, and then you find that moment when you kind of go, oh, hang on, this is working. And I think it's because I'm working in animation, the medium demands a lot of control freakery as well. So it's not that, like, I kind of talk about it being all these kind of trying to surprise things into new combinations, but there's huge swathes of time where there's no surprises, or I certainly don't want surprises. It's just about kind of driving this thing through. But I think what I do is deliberately kind of on either side of that process, create space for those happy accidents. And in terms of the visuals, that will be really just moving things around between different locations, different texts, different sounds, and kind of seeing what starts to kind of gather its own force, where this kind of new logic starts to suggest itself. And then at the end, I often work with live performance and live music within the context of an exhibition, almost to bring that process of layering a new kind of potential back into the space. And it's also invited sometimes through the fact that the sound and the image, they will all have different durations. There might be 4 screens, all with different durations, and a soundtrack with a different duration. So it's always surprising itself. They kind of loop around each other, and you'll never necessarily be able to see the exact same combination again. So it's about embedding accidents in there.
I'm interested to see that by hook or by crook, all three of you have kind of confessed to control freakery of some kind or dictatorship of some kind in your work. So maybe is dictatorship? It's too, I'm messing with that word. But is it, that strong singular, even if it is one person at the head saying, no, look, I really need this to say, is that actually important to fight the corner as well as give in sometimes, Roger, and say, no, you know what, there's a bit too much going on?
I know you got to fight the corner. Some of the best collaborations are ones where there's a good bit of fighting going on. Sometimes you fight the corner, but I am reminded, just from what Alva was saying, of a quote from Arnold Palmer, the golfer: "The more I practice, the luckier I get."
Yeah.
And right now, I've more or less handed things over to my right brain. It's whispering in my ear, leave this to me. I know how to do this.
Get out of my way.
Get out of my way. And the accidents, as I said, the gold dust, the accidents are something which maybe it's the older I get, the more I'm trusting it, the more they're happening.
I have a question that's come in by text here. Very interesting in terms of where we are. We all spoke about disruption of different kinds. I think all three of you spoke about that in terms of realizing and understanding your work. And so this question, the questioner wants to remain anonymous. Okay, that's fair enough. Given that disruption is part of all of your work, what do you think is the importance of disruption in our current world? Very political question in lots of ways. Adrian?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, I think we're experiencing perpetual disruption, and I don't know quite what the artist's function in that is. To try and make some sense of and place these disruptions, or understand that there are disruptions like COVID. It's pretty obvious. We all know our lives have been turned upside down. Of course, none of us really know what it means yet, and maybe that'll be a long game. So I suppose there are different periods when disruption means different things. I'm working on a musical for later this year. For next year, I am optimistic that there will be a theatre open to put it in. And I told you about it, and it was it's based on a story from Heathcote Williams. And Heathcote Williams was one of the great disruptors. I mean, he was in the 70s and 80s, sort of situationist disruptor. And those were perhaps rather smug times in which that kind of disruption really needed to happen. And you needed the kind of playful anarchy of people like Heathcote around. Now we're in different times where we live in a state of perpetual dis-ease. And so I think it's the disruption and the artist is something different now.
Roger, I mean, I quoted in the introduction to our talk earlier on about that thing that was said to you about planting. You were the flowering of a seed that was never planted in this country. When you started with electronic music back in the 60s, I suppose, late 60s, early 70s, there was little or nothing in that respect. Was that a disruptive act?
No. I don't consider myself a disruptor. No, that was just it's hard to know looking back, because I never really imagined myself as doing anything new. It was just that I was interested in the technology, and started with 2 microphones and a tape recorder at home, and felt quite uncomfortable in the early days. Just on a note, I remember telling you at one point, at the age of 25, I found myself in Holland studying electronic music on a scholarship, and I didn't understand a word. It was in English, but these lectures were going on for 3 or 4 months, and I was sitting there thinking, what the hell? What have I got myself into? So I suppose in that sense, my world was very disrupted by knowing that I wanted to move in that direction, but feeling totally out of it, you know. Very, very slowly I learned how to do it, you know.
And do you have any sense of the current political, current social disruption, any sense of that feeding into your work?
No, in fact, I've been completely, my work has been uninterrupted by the COVID. The only difference being that for exercise, I've been running around the small garden instead of going for hill walks down in Bray. But I've been just composing 8 to 10 hours a day, as I do all the time. So it hasn't.
It hasn't disrupted you particularly. No. Alva, to what extent, if you're picking up on social or political disruption like that, do you impose some kind of political or social message onto your work?
I think it's a kind of double-edged thing, because there's an engagement on one level, and then there's also trying to talk about something from a position of uncertainty rather than authority. So I think that reflects back into a kind of political reality at the moment, where there is such pressure being exerted on representation. I think that comes through kind of social media and image saturation, and the fact that the world is just full of images, and that very extreme relationship between technology and representation at the moment, I think, becomes definitely something to grapple with. And then also just a wider questioning of the kind of interpretive systems that we're so used to. So I think my engagement comes through the choice of location, and those locations are usually chosen because of the kind of politics of visibility and invisibility that kind of attach to them. But then the way I work with them is to deliberately make them kind of slightly unknowable, to make them quite abstract at times. So there's a kind of trying to reinscribe a relationship to these places. So it's like, sorry,
in some ways, are you want to pose the question rather than present the answer?
Yeah, I think the disruption is it's a quiet disruption of our familiar ways of viewing and engaging with certain sites and certain images, whether that's Orientalist photography, or whether it's a museum, or where it's just an archetypal landscape. It's kind of a it's a disruption of the familiar space of that image.
A very quick question to you, Adrian, which is a kind of I hope a yes answer, or maybe you'll be able to give me some detail on it. It's from Catherine is the questioner here. Will Adrian be bringing his work to Ireland?
Yeah, no, very much hope so. But all of these here, we're back to the uncertainty. Yes, we actually had a very pleasurable time in Ireland, I think about 20 years ago in Dublin. And I've worked in the north quite a few times. But yes, very much hope so. Let's hope there are spaces that we can perform in before too long.
Yeah, and I know that the plan had been for Clonmel that you were going to be involved in devising and working on a piece.
Well, I was looking forward to coming and doing a sort of high-speed residency and trying to make a piece of so-called legislative theatre, which is this form of theatre which does end up with a debate, which ends up with suggestions of laws or procedures should be passed, but maybe next year.
Yeah, well, let's see how that all goes. And since we've come inevitably to talking about COVID, I'll finish up with a question around that. And not one that I've heard posed too often, actually. Is it Jack Reardon, I think, is the questioner here for everyone. How do you expect the arts will respond to isolation, the isolation that we've all been experiencing over the past while? Will we be overwhelmed by COVID-related art? I suppose the only way you can answer that is by talking about what the sort of art you've been making yourself in the meantime. Would you see anything you've been doing or in recent months, Alva, as COVID-related, or, you know, the idea has been inspired in any way by COVID? Can it be that direct?
I'm in a kind of funny position in that the work that I was in the process of making kind of maps on uncannily to some of the issues that are happening now. But that said, I found it like utterly and completely uninspiring as a period. And I've completely resisted the idea that we respond to this. I feel like my only response is to be very quiet and be very distracted. So I think that the issues are huge and are there and are going to leak out in numerous ways in the culture. But as for finding it a productive time or something that I want to throw my own personal response in as part of the mash of people's brains at the moment, no, that's not where I'm at.
Yeah, and I suppose it's what you say is quite interesting there, because in the last, since March, I could safely say that at least once a night on the radio program, some artist we're reading a book, or we're listening to a piece of music, or we're looking at a film, and something that they made 2 years ago fits directly into what we're experiencing right now. I don't know if that's coincidental, or maybe that's just something we do with art. Do you think, Roger, that perhaps we put a reading on it which is about our current situation?
Not in my case, really. I'm dealing in very internalized worlds. But I mean, the one thing I will say is that the work I'm working on now is what I'm calling a studio-only opera. So it's not going to have a performance, but it's going to exist on CD and digitally, and as part of this festival. So in that sense, I don't need a theatre for it. The COVID situation again hasn't affected me. In fact, it slightly maybe benefited me. That this
You've enjoyed the isolation.
It'll probably never get a theatre performance, but that's okay. It's going to be an online performance. It's a studio only, listening only opera, unless somebody films, does an abstract film of it. So I don't need a stage. That
sounds as if it could be for the next lockdown, possibly. Finally, then. Yeah, let's not hex it for ourselves. Adrian, finally to you then. Do you see COVID-related work? Do you see people that, if you are able to do workshops at the moment, are those type of topics coming up?
Well, look, two answers. I mean, number one, already when one watches anything where people behave normally and cluster together, it looks strange. So the way we look has already changed, in the same way that, I mean, you read something by Thomas Hardy, and if there was a mobile phone in it, it just wouldn't work, if you see what I mean. So the way we see things changes, and we can't help that. So we don't know I've no idea what that effect will be, but what I already know is that we already find things strange which were normal 10 seconds ago. In terms of my own work, I have used this period working with a very large group of people who've experienced homelessness, and we're just reading Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year together. Because I find it very useful to focus on an external object, and it's a rather wonderful text. It's a very beautiful text. It's quite easy to read, actually, but it's very considered, and it has quite a lot to teach us. So I've worked with 3 cohorts of 10 people. I'm going to work with another group of 10 shortly, and we're simply reading it together. And then we're telling stories of stuff that's happened to us. This is all happening on Zoom, some people on a phone call. And out of that, I am making a durational project, which will be a COVID year parallel Defoe's plague year. So I'm trying to make the best of it, but yeah, it's really by reflecting on an external object that we may achieve a durational project which might be of interest, telling us stories of what has happened in this time to the people I work with.
All right, listen, we've been online now for 25 minutes, and all three of you have been so generous with your time today, both in the lengthy session that we had in our conversation and indeed during this question and answer session. There are lots more questions, but we can't get to all of them. But Adrian Jackson, Alvin Ivrain, Roger Doyle, it's been an absolute privilege and joy to speak with all three of you today. I hope we can do this in the same room at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And don't forget that Roger's the Oedipus section of Roger's opera I Girl, that'll be tonight, 7 o'clock. Will you sit down and watch it as it happens, Roger? I know you've probably seen it at stage, but will you get a thrill out of actually that live moment at 7 this evening?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've only seen it once. I only saw it last night for the first time, and it as part of the process is another thing I find totally fascinating. Trish sent me a version of it a few days ago, and I had some reservations, and we spoke on the phone. And I know with Trish, you don't really have to say much to her. She won't even really directly respond, but you know that she'll go away and make all kinds of changes, subtle changes. So I watched it again just yesterday, and it's so much better.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I'm going to watch it, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, well, listen, what I saw, what I absolutely adored, and I'm looking forward to seeing that full version, not just the Oedipus section. Get to work.
Oh, the 2-hour version.
The whole thing. Let's do that. Adrian, Alva, Roger, thanks a million. Don't forget to go online yourselves and check out everything that's happening at the Clonmel Junction Festival. Lots of it online, obviously, over the next couple of days, because that's the way these things are at the moment. But from my three guests, indeed from myself, Sean Rocks, goodbye. Hope to talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. That was great.